I don't remember stopping the car. That's the worst part. One moment I was gripping the wheel, sweat dripping into my eyes as the sun crushed the roof of the Chevy like a furnace, and the next, stillness. No hum of the engine, no ticking of the cooling hood, no wind. Just silence, like the kind you get inside a coffin, thick and muffled, pressing into your eardrums. The desert around me looked the same as it had for the last 50 miles, flat, pale, dead, except now it felt like it was watching me. Like the sand had grown eyes. 3 hours earlier, I left Todd in the passenger seat. He was half asleep, slouched with his sunglasses crooked and a bottle of warm Gatorade melting against his thigh. The car had stalled without warning, coughing once like a dying animal and then going utterly still. No signal, no radio, just heat and that cursed smell of something fried deep inside the dashboard. We argued about waiting versus walking. I told him I'd seen a gas station marked on the map about 12 miles back, and I could make it on foot. He grumbled, but stayed. I made sure he had water, left him the flare gun just in case, and started walking. It felt like time didn't work right in that desert. I walked fast, then slow, then ran for a stretch, but the landscape never changed. The same boulders, the same sun that never moved, the same tattered plastic bag that flapped once in the distance, then vanished. I got to the gas station, eventually. A sun-bleached shack, long dead, its windows shattered and the roof caved in. No pumps, no phone, nothing but silence and dust. I screamed into the wind. It didn't answer. When I got back, I knew something was wrong before I even saw the car. It was the absence. No footprints, no drag marks from my boots, no tire tracks. Just the car sitting perfectly clean on untouched sand, like it had been gently placed there by a giant hand. Like it hadn't moved in decades. My heart started hammering so hard I tasted copper. And Todd, he was in the front seat, upright, arms folded like a wax figure. Grinning. Too wide. Teeth too perfect. Lips too dry. He turned to look at me, slow and mechanical, like a ventriloquist doll, and said, "You're back. All good now." His voice was normal. But his eyes, oh God. His eyes didn't move. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at anything. They were just open, reflecting the sky like two little mirrors. I didn't speak. Couldn't. I backed away, my mouth full of sand, my knees shaking like an old engine about to stall again. That's when I felt the shadow behind me. Cold. Wrong. Not from the sun. I turned, slowly, like in a nightmare where you already know what's there, and from the ground behind me, the sand shifted. It rose, forming a shape. Arms first, then shoulders, then the head. My head. It was Todd. Or something that wore his skin like a discarded coat. Only now it had none. Just raw, red muscle and black sockets where the eyes should be. And it was smiling. Same as before. Identical. And then it started walking toward me. I froze, caught somewhere between scream and silence, my breath stuck in the narrowest part of my throat like a bone. The thing that wore Todd's face, or had once, moved with a kind of jerking grace, limbs bending in ways that weren't entirely human, as though it remembered how to imitate walking but had forgotten the purpose behind it. Each step pressed into the sand without sound, leaving no footprint, no disturbance, as if it wasn't really there, or worse, as if the desert itself welcomed it, embraced it like something ancient come home. I stumbled backward, boots slipping, trying to put space between me and that raw, glistening mass of exposed flesh that reflected the sun like wet lacquer, its grin growing wider with every step it took. It wasn't smiling out of recognition or malice. It was smiling like it had just tasted something sweet and couldn't wait for another bite. I turned back to the car, that old Chevy we'd bought used outside Barstow, the one with the missing rearview mirror and the rusted license plate, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd lost my mind in the heat. Maybe I was dehydrated, sun-poisoned, hallucinating. Maybe Todd had been right to stay. Maybe he was fine and I was just seeing things. But the man in the driver's seat, the man who looked like Todd, still sitting stiffly with his arms folded like he'd never moved, hadn't blinked once since I got there. Not once. His grin hadn't faltered, his eyes hadn't flicked. And worst of all, the Gatorade bottle he'd been holding earlier was still full, standing perfectly upright in the cup holder, not a drop spilled. Like no time had passed. Like he'd never even taken a sip. The thing behind me didn't stop. I heard it, or rather, I didn't hear it, and that absence of sound was louder than any scream, moving closer. The air got colder, tighter, as though it was being pulled into the vacuum left by its presence. I felt my knees go soft, barely caught myself on the hood of the car, my palms pressing against the burning metal. There was a smell now, copper, rot, and something worse. Like wet coins left in a dead man's mouth. I wanted to run, but every direction felt wrong. The desert stretched out endlessly, like a looping backdrop in an old cartoon, no matter how far I'd gone earlier. The gas station was gone, or maybe it had never been there to begin with. All that remained was sand, heat, and the thing that wasn't Todd closing the distance between us with every silent, deliberate step. I yelled his name, Todd, without meaning to, and the figure in the car tilted its head just slightly, like a dog trying to place a distant sound. That tiny movement broke something inside me. I ran around the car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the driver's side door, trying to yank it open. Locked. I slammed my fist against the glass, screaming now, not even words, just fear boiling out of me in guttural, animal bursts. Behind me, the thing stopped walking. I could feel its eyes on my spine, that empty stare that didn't need pupils to see straight into the softest parts of me. The door unlocked with a quiet click. Todd, or the version in the car, turned his head toward me, smile unwavering, and said, just above a whisper, "You shouldn't have left." I stepped back, away from the door, heart racing like it was trying to tear through my ribs. I looked from him to the thing behind me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw them both at once. Two versions. Same smile. Same shape. One untouched, one flayed, and neither of them blinking. And in that instant, I knew the real Todd was gone. Or worse, he'd never been there to begin with. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Not from numbness, but from something deeper, an instinctual paralysis, like a rabbit sensing the hawk's shadow and choosing stillness over escape. My mind scrambled through memories of the drive, every mile replaying itself with distorted clarity. Todd had been there. I remembered his jokes, the way he hummed to classic rock tunes barely audible over the radio static, the half-empty bag of beef jerky on his lap. But now, all of it felt rehearsed. Too clean. Too symmetrical. His reactions in hindsight lacked weight, like a person mimicking emotion rather than feeling it. The kind of emptiness you don't notice until you try to grab hold of it, and your hand passes straight through. The skin thing had stopped behind me, silent and close. I didn't dare turn to face it. Instead, I kept my eyes on the Todd in the car, whose smile had stretched just a bit wider, revealing teeth that didn't look quite human anymore. Too even. Too long. His lips barely moved, but I heard his voice again, clearer this time, almost melodic. "You walked away." And it followed. There was no emotion in the tone, only inevitability, like a clock striking midnight. I backed away slowly, heel pressing into the coarse sand that no longer crunched beneath me. It was too smooth. Too perfect. Like a stage prepared for a finale. Behind me, a low sound began to rise, not from a mouth, but from the desert itself, a low, throaty vibration, like wind passing through a hollow skull. The sky above dimmed, though no clouds formed. The sun remained, still hanging, still blazing, yet casting no warmth, only sterile white light. I realized then that something had shifted, not just around me but within me. This wasn't the desert anymore. Or rather, it was never just desert. It was a place, a pocket of something older, something patient. A cursed echo chamber where time folds and replays itself like a ritual. I wasn't in Nevada anymore, not really. I was in its shadow. And I had brought the shadow back with me. The Todd in the car, or whatever wore his memory like a costume, slowly opened the door and stepped out, the same jerky grace as the thing behind me. Now they both stood in front of me. Identical in every way except for skin. One blood-slicked and raw, the other pristine and smiling. I was surrounded, yet not touched. They didn't need to move. They had already taken what they wanted, I was never meant to reach the gas station. That walk had been a test, or a ritual, or an invitation. And I had accepted it the moment I left him alone in that car. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from realization. This was a loop, or a mirror, or a joke told by something that had watched men die of thirst for 1,000 years and still didn't understand why we kept coming back. My fingers trembled as I raised them to my face, unsure of what I might feel. Skin? Bone? Or nothing at all? The two Todds began to merge, slowly, impossibly, like wax figures melting toward each other under a desert sun that had grown too close. I wanted to scream, but sound had left me. Thought had left me. Only horror remained, slow and endless. As the figures became one, an impossible fusion of skin and muscle and grinning teeth, I took a step backward and felt the sand shift beneath me like a mouth exhaling. I turned, finally, unable to resist the compulsion, and saw what had risen behind me. A shape. A third form. Taller than either Todd, faceless, standing exactly where I had first broken down. It had no features, only outline, like a heat mirage solidified into form. I should have run. I should have dropped to my knees. But all I did was whisper, to no one, to nothing, "Who are you?" And it answered without words, just the sensation of being watched, being weighed, being understood down to the marrow. Then it stepped back into the sand as if descending into water, leaving no trace, not even a ripple. I turned again, slowly, but the car was gone. The figures were gone. Nothing but horizon in every direction. And beneath my feet, a single object half buried, my keychain. Still warm. Still mine. I knelt and picked it up, and behind me, I heard someone whisper in a voice exactly like mine, "You shouldn't have left." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because I already knew. The first time I saw my own face staring back at me with eyes that didn't blink, I thought it was a dream. But dreams don't last for hours, and they don't smell like gasoline, rust, and old paper. I still hear the faint click of the clock on the wall behind her, or me, ticking out the same second over and over again. Tick. 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 A cursed lullaby that made me want to scream but left my throat dry as the desert wind. I should have turned around then. But it was too late. Everything after mile 80 was too late. It started the day we tested the new GPS prototype Max's company was developing, some sleek thing with adaptive signal tracking and a smart predictive engine. His boss called it fail-proof. So naturally, Max decided to prove it by driving us deep into the desert, past where normal roads end and old ones don't know they're dead yet. I didn't argue. It sounded like an adventure, and God knows we needed something to shake us out of the routine. The desert was sharp and endless, like a broken thought that never resolved. Saguaro cacti stood like rotting sentinels under a sky too wide to make sense. The road narrowed as we drove farther from the highway, and by the time we passed the sign that read mile 80, the world felt wrong. The GPS blipped. A small glitch. Max cursed under his breath, tapped the screen. Then again. It froze. I watched his face shift, from focused to annoyed to something I didn't want to name. We decided to turn back. That's when the road folded on itself. I don't know how to describe it. We should have been heading back toward Phoenix, but within 10 minutes we passed the mile 80 sign again, same bullet holes, same sun-bleached sticker half torn at the corner. The air started to shimmer like it does when you're about to faint, only heavier, like the heat had a pulse. We turned around again, slower this time, and again. Mile 80. Max laughed at first. The kind of laugh that comes before fear sets in. "Maybe it's a trick of the desert," he muttered. "We'll figure it out." But as the sun dropped behind the jagged hills and the shadows grew long and mean, the road didn't change. The same rock on the left, shaped like a lopsided skull. The same rusted fence on the right, humming low, like wires in a nightmare. I stared at my reflection in the car window and felt it blink. At exactly 3:33 that night, the car stopped. The dashboard lights flickered and died. Max tried the ignition. Nothing. Outside, the desert was black and humming. No stars, no moon, just the slow, awful silence of something watching. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to breathe. Behind us, I swear I heard footsteps. Not animal. Human. Slow. Purposeful. Coming closer. Max got out to check the engine. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My hand froze on the door handle, like it had forgotten how to move. He disappeared into the dark with just the pale blue glow of his phone. And I sat there, listening. Tick. 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 The clock on the GPS screen blinked 3:33. It never moved again. By morning, the sky had shifted to a dull, bruised yellow, as if the desert sun had died during the night and left behind only its rotting shadow. Max was still outside, though he hadn't returned to the car. I found him crouched by the hood, staring not at the engine but at the road, or rather, the place where the road should have been. The asphalt was still there, sure, but it had changed, subtly but undeniably. The painted lines were warped, bleeding outward like veins under skin. Even the dust seemed heavier, clinging to our shoes, our hair, our thoughts. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he'd seen in the dark, but his eyes told me not to. They were sunken, distant, like he'd already begun to disappear in some small, irreversible way. We drove again, though neither of us believed it would make a difference. The GPS no longer responded, stuck in a frozen frame showing our location as static, unblinking coordinates in the middle of a vast nothing. Every direction we tried, every turn we took, returned us to that same cursed marker, mile 80. Sometimes it appeared faster, after just a few minutes. Other times it took nearly an hour, lulling us into a false hope before snapping us back to the same goddamn sign with its peeling sticker and the dark smear I was almost certain hadn't been there before. It looked like blood. Old, dried, almost black. I didn't say it out loud. That evening, things began to twist in ways we could no longer rationalize. First it was the signs, not just mile 80, but other roadside markers, ones we hadn't noticed before, with strange inscriptions. You are not alone. Time is not kind here. Watch the shadows. They weren't official signs. They were crudely made, handwritten, nailed into broken posts or bent rebar. Max insisted they hadn't been there before. I didn't argue. I just stared at them, their meanings flickering like dying neurons in my brain. The radio, which had been dead since the signal cut out, began to hiss, soft static at first, then strange fragments of a woman's voice, whispering things just beneath the threshold of understanding. It sounded almost like my name. At sunset, we passed a dead coyote on the side of the road, nothing unusual for the desert. But 15 minutes later, we saw it again. Same body, same twisted position, same gaping hole in its side. It hadn't moved. We were circling, looping through a cursed reel that refused to let us go. The sky darkened too fast, unnaturally fast, as though time itself had fractured. At exactly 3:33, the engine cut out again. This time, the air grew thick, humid, impossibly so for the desert, and I could taste iron on my tongue. Something was near us. Watching. Waiting. Max wanted to leave the car, to walk into the hills and look for elevation, signal, a way out. I grabbed his arm and begged him not to. I didn't know why, only that every part of me screamed that if we left the vehicle, we'd never find it again. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he didn't recognize my fear, or maybe didn't feel his own anymore. Still, he stayed. We both tried to sleep, but something tapped the windows during the night. Not once. Dozens of times. Light taps, irregular, like fingernails or brittle claws. I kept my eyes shut, though I could feel the shadow behind the glass leaning closer. I swear I felt its breath on my cheek. The car was cold, and yet my skin was slick with sweat. By the next morning, the horizon changed. There was a structure now, a building that hadn't been there the day before. Faded wood, sagging roof, a cracked window covered with grime and the outline of a handprint far too long to be human. It looked like an old postal station, the kind used in the early 20th century for frontier routes, but in far worse condition. A sign above the door read Wellington Outpost, though the letters were chipped and warped, as if rewritten by something with no grasp of language, only memory. Max didn't speak. He just pointed toward it and started walking. I followed, every step heavier than the last, as though the ground itself wanted to hold me back. I opened the door first. It creaked open with the sound of dry bone, and inside, bathed in dim, flickering light from an unseen source, stood a figure behind the counter. It was me. Or something wearing my face. It didn't move, not at first. It just stood there behind the warped counter, hands resting on the splintered wood, face slack but unmistakably mine, though pale and waxy, like a bad copy made from memory. The eyes were wrong, too still, too distant, glassy with a depth that didn't belong to anything alive. My stomach twisted, not in fear but in recognition, the kind that comes when your subconscious reaches conclusions your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. Max stood behind me, silent, rigid, as if even the air around us had been drained of motion. Then the thing, the version of me that shouldn't have existed, blinked, slow and deliberate, like it was waking from a long sleep or trying to remember what it was supposed to be. Its lips parted. It didn't speak, but a sound rose from its throat, low and wet, like something bubbling through a thick liquid. That was when I understood, it wasn't just a mimic. It was waiting. It had been waiting for me. Max turned and ran without a word, the door slamming shut behind him with a gust that knocked dust from the rafters. I stood frozen, my mind trying to make sense of the impossible. The thing leaned forward, and its hands, longer than mine, slightly off, as though each finger had one too many joints, gripped the edge of the counter. Then it began to smile. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to show the curve of teeth that weren't quite right, too uniform, too smooth, like porcelain crafted by something that had only heard about humans but never seen one up close. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I just stepped backward until I felt the door against my spine and clawed it open. The light outside hit my eyes like a slap, but I didn't stop until I was halfway across the road. Max was gone. I called his name until my throat was raw, but there was no answer, just wind and the low electric buzz that had become constant since the second day. The outpost still stood behind me, but its windows were now dark, the door shut, and I didn't want to look back again. I climbed into the car, locked the doors, and waited. Hours passed. Maybe more. I could no longer trust time here. Night came like an ambush, no sunset, no warning, just the sudden absence of light like someone had flipped the world off. I kept the dome light on for as long as I could until the battery died, and then I sat in that thick, unnatural dark, trying not to think about the thing with my face. When the morning finally arrived, it didn't bring warmth. The sun was pale, like a memory of the sun, and the landscape was wrong again. The road had changed. The lines were gone entirely now, the asphalt cracked in impossible patterns, almost like symbols or runes scorched into the surface. I stepped out, not because I wanted to, but because I knew I had to. The car was no longer safe, if it ever had been. And besides, I couldn't stay still. Something inside me had begun to unravel, threads pulling loose one at a time. The only direction left was forward. I walked. I don't know for how long. My feet blistered, cracked. I drank the last of the water. I passed the coyote again. This time it was standing. It didn't move, just stared as I stumbled past it, but I felt its gaze like heat along my spine. I didn't dare look back. That's the first rule, I think, though no one ever tells you, don't look back in places like this. You give it permission when you do. You acknowledge it. You let it in. Eventually, I found another mile marker. Mile 80. Of course. But this time, there was no road beyond it. Just a sheer drop into a canyon that hadn't been there before, a bottomless, yawning chasm filled with shifting shadows that churned like water. Something was moving in it, rising. I should have been terrified, should have screamed or run or fallen to my knees. But I didn't. I stood there at the edge, and I understood. I remembered. There was never a road out. Max had never made it past that first night. Maybe I hadn't either. Maybe I'd been talking to something else the whole time. Maybe the outpost wasn't a building but a mirror. Or a warning. I saw my reflection again, standing just across the canyon, on the opposite edge, motionless, identical, and waiting. The same waxy skin. The same two long fingers. It smiled again. I took a step forward, and the ground didn't give. I didn't fall. I just walked into the void, not because I wanted to, but because I recognized it. The desert didn't trap us. It revealed us. It shows you who you were before the world lied to you. Before names and stories and survival. That thing wearing my face wasn't a copy. It was the original. And I was the echo. We were already too far when I saw the footprints. A circle of them, half erased by wind, all ours. I recognized my boots, Logan's Nikes, Riley's massive tread like she stomped through the dust with rage instead of caution. But the strangest thing? They weren't fresh. They were cracked at the edges, faded like they'd been there for days. Maybe weeks. I didn't say anything. No one else noticed. Or maybe they just didn't want to admit it. The air shimmered like a cheap mirage, the kind you laugh at in road trip movies. But we weren't laughing. Each step toward the crater pulled at my lungs. Not like elevation sickness or heat exhaustion, I felt both. This was thicker. Like breathing through cloth soaked in old blood. You taste rust. You remember things that didn't happen. Or maybe they did. The map was Logan's find. Some satellite overlay dumped on Reddit with coordinates tagged as the eye. A perfect circle in the Mojave, visible only through glitchy overlays no one could replicate. We checked Google, NASA, all the usual places. Nothing. Just flat sand. Logan swore it was real. Riley loved that shit, conspiracies, cosmic horror, forbidden places. Me? I should have stayed behind. But boredom's louder than fear when you're 24 and think the world still owes you an adventure. By the time we parked the SUV near what looked like nowhere, it was nearly dusk. Shadows stretched wrong, like they bent around something we couldn't see. There were no birds. No wind. Just this humming sound, low and constant, buried beneath the silence. I thought it was the engine cooling, but even after we'd walked half a mile, it followed. I kept looking back. At one point, I was sure I saw movement, just a flicker, on the edge of a dune. Like something ducked out of view. But when I turned to point it out, Logan said I looked pale and kept walking. Riley didn't even answer. And then came the first deja vu. A dead cactus. Bent in on itself like a melted skeleton. I'd seen it before. I could describe every twist in its charred spine. But I'd never been in this part of the desert. None of us had. Right? Logan asked if I remembered the dream. What dream? The one where we found the crater. And it was already open. He said it like he was talking about a movie we'd all watched together. I didn't answer. My tongue felt wrong in my mouth. I was starting to remember too. A scream buried under sand. A black sun above us. A circle that kept spinning, even after we left. Except, we never left. The night didn't fall like it usually does in the desert, it collapsed. One moment the sky still held onto shades of pale gold, and the next, it was nothing but a vast, churning ink overhead, the stars unusually dim, like they too were holding their breath. We pitched camp reluctantly, a few yards from the rim of the crater, though in truth, none of us wanted to look directly at it. It wasn't just the size or shape, something about the sand inside it was wrong. It didn't shift or ripple with the breeze like the rest of the desert. It just lay there, still and black, as if some nightmare had burned a hole into the earth and the land had never healed. I couldn't sleep. None of us did, really. We stopped pretending after the third hour of tossing. The hum was louder now, but not in volume, just in presence. It got into your skull, into the back of your eyes, like a migraine that hummed a cursed lullaby instead of pounding drums. I sat outside the tent and watched shadows dance around our campfire even though the flames had died an hour ago. They didn't flicker like reflections, they pulsed, elongated and slowed, like they were underwater or struggling to imitate life. Riley muttered something from inside the tent, her voice sharp, cracking. I crawled in, thinking maybe she'd had a nightmare, but she wasn't asleep. She was sitting up, face pale in the dim light of her phone screen, staring at a photo she insisted she hadn't taken. It was us, standing on the crater's rim, with that same dead cactus right behind. But none of us had snapped that picture. We hadn't even reached the rim yet. That's what we thought. And yet, there we were, perfectly framed, all three of us looking straight at the lens with expressions I couldn't quite read, half awe, half terror, and something worse, familiarity. I tried to joke, said maybe Logan had staged it months ago and forgot, but even my voice sounded hollow. Logan didn't laugh. He just stared and asked, very quietly, if I'd noticed we weren't sweating. And he was right. Out here, where the temperature had to be near triple digits even after sundown, none of us were sweating. Our clothes were dry. Our skin was cool. And the sand around the tents, completely undisturbed. No footprints. No drag marks. Nothing to show we'd walked here at all. Around midnight, Logan stood and just started walking. No warning. No shoes. He moved with this stiff kind of urgency, like his legs weren't entirely his own. Riley and I ran after him, calling, pleading, but he didn't stop until he was halfway down the slope of the crater. His feet barely sank into the surface, like the sand was resisting him, or maybe he wasn't really touching it at all. When we finally reached him, he turned to us with this expression that made my stomach twist. It wasn't fear or confusion, it was acceptance. He whispered, "We've done this before," and then collapsed. Not like fainting, like being switched off. Dragging him out felt like trying to pull weight underwater. The air thickened, turned syrupy and wrong, and I swear the sky overhead began to ripple like heat waves, only cold. Riley screamed. She never screams. It was short, sharp, the sound of something breaking inside. We left Logan just at the rim. He started breathing again on his own, but he wouldn't wake. Not even when I slapped him hard enough to sting my hand. Back at the tents, I found another photo on my phone, taken from inside the crater, looking up at me and Riley as we knelt over Logan. I checked the metadata. It said it was shot 3 days ago. And then I noticed my face in that picture was different. My shirt had blood on it. My left cheek was cut. Riley wasn't wearing the same clothes. There were flies. I felt bile rise in my throat. Riley grabbed my wrist and hissed the same thing Logan had said. "We've done this before." But that wasn't what broke me. What broke me was the sudden rush of memory, burning sun, hands scraping at collapsing sand, Logan screaming, Riley missing, the crater swallowing everything, again and again and again. I remembered dying. I remembered forgetting. And above it all, I remembered the voice I heard the first time we stepped over the edge, a voice like sand grinding through teeth. Desert doesn't forget. I should have left. I know that now. I should have taken Riley's hand, slung Logan over my shoulder, and stumbled blind into the night, away from that perfect circle carved into the desert like a warning written in ancient breath. But instead, I sat down. Right at the edge. Not because I was tired, not because I was scared, but because something in me whispered that this was the only place I'd ever really belonged. Riley paced behind me, her steps frantic, uneven, crunching the dry earth like someone trying to remember how legs worked. The wind had died entirely. No insects. No sounds from Logan, who now breathed with slow, unnatural rhythm. Like a machine that hadn't been built quite right but still insisted on running. I stared into the crater. The sand inside was darker now. Wet, almost. It pulsed. Like something beneath it was alive, dreaming, or waiting. Maybe both. I couldn't tell where the edges ended anymore, My vision kept folding in on itself, the shadows twisting in spirals that reminded me of crop circles, old satellite images of failed military projects, or maybe symbols in some forgotten tongue that lived in the earth before maps or compasses. I remembered seeing one of them before, etched into a notebook we'd found back at that gas station an hour before the turnoff. The notebook that none of us brought, and yet, I could see it clearly now. Scribbles, coordinates, a page torn in half with words smudged in what looked too much like blood. I remembered my hand shaking as I touched the spine of it. I remembered not reading it, but knowing it anyway. Riley knelt beside me. Her face wasn't hers anymore. I mean, it was same shape, same freckles, same sharp jaw, but something behind her eyes had been replaced. I saw recognition there, but not the comforting kind. It was the kind of look you give someone when you see your own nightmare walking toward you wearing a familiar face. She whispered again that this wasn't the first time. That we'd been here. Many times. That we had screamed. Run. Killed. Died. Returned. Forgotten. Over and over, the cycle swallowing itself like the snake eating its tail. And then she said the thing that snapped what was left of me in two: sometimes, we never make it this far. It made sense now, the doppelganger photos, the flickers of deja vu that weren't just tricks of the mind, the way our bodies didn't obey normal rules. The desert was not a place. It was a memory loop. A cursed echo chamber of souls that trespassed, woke something primal, and were punished by being stitched into its fabric like static in a dying transmission. We had died here before. Maybe dozens of times. Maybe more. Each time thinking we were exploring something new. Each time lured by the same digital map glitch, the same eerie satellite silence, the same impossible perfect shape that doesn't belong in nature. But the crater wasn't just an anomaly. It was a lock. And we were the key that kept turning the wrong way. Riley stood and took a step forward. Her feet sank slightly into the black sand, just enough to ripple the surface. I reached for her, but my fingers stopped just short of her jacket. She looked back once, not with fear or sadness, but pity. Then she whispered, "Maybe this is the one we remember." And then she walked in. No struggle. No sound. Just gone, like mist in the heat. Logan sat up behind me, his eyes wide, mouth opening to scream, but no sound came out. His expression twisted, contorted with something ancient. Not pain. Not confusion. Something deeper. Something older. Something that didn't belong in a human face. I backed away, but too slowly. The air was thick again. The hum-nala scream pitched so low it lived beneath hearing, inside bones. My own limbs moved without my permission. Toward the crater. As I stepped in, the sand felt warm, not hot. Like blood. Like flesh. Like memory. I turned once more and saw Logan following, his face already changing, merging with something unseen. Above us, the stars blinked, flickered, then stopped. Not disappeared, stopped. Frozen, like everything else had been, over and over and over. And just before I crossed the center, I remembered something that made my stomach clench, a detail from that torn notebook, half legible, but clear now as day. The desert doesn't kill. It remembers. You. Then the world turned inside out, and I was falling through myself. Again. Or maybe, for the first time.